So today, let's take a moment and let's go over my spreadsheet for MSTY. I did purchase some shares this past week and we did earn that distribution. So let's update my spreadsheet and see where I'm at. Hello my friends, this is Legend. So today, this past week, we did earn that distribution of $1.47. And on the X date, I did purchase a few more shares. So I wanted to go into my spreadsheet, update my position on MSTY, explain everything on my sheet, and then we can also talk about how you can get a copy of the sheet if you do not have a way to track your MSTY position or any of the other high yield ETF positions. So let's just jump right over into my spreadsheet and let's start plugging some numbers. Okay, so here we are on my stock tracker sheet. And I've shown this a few times and we've just been updating it as I make new positions, I purchase new shares, or if we earn that distribution. And in this time, I actually purchased a few more shares and we did earn that distribution. So I wanted to update my sheet and see where I'm at. But before we do that, for some of the newer people who are out here who may have not seen this sheet yet, I'm just going to quickly go over how the sheet works. So at the first up here at the top, as you can see, it's got the ticker symbol, and that's where you would enter in your ticker symbol of the stock that you want to track. In this case, I'm tracking MSTY, M-S-T-Y. And when you enter that, it will kick out that current price. And that current price is only the price during market hours. So if it is after market hours, that will be the closing price, okay? And as you can see here, I have a total of 410 shares with an average price, and that's a purchase price of $25.12. And that's the average of those 410 shares at the amount that I spent, which is right here of $10,297. Now I have earned some distributions as we've been going along here, and I've earned a total of $7,500 in distributions, and I've earned some premium on MSTY, and that is a total of $724 shown here. This column here, or this cell here, showing $8,441.90. That is basically the number of shares that you have times the current price. Currently, the market value of my position is $8,441.90. But what that does not include is any premium or distributions that we've earned. This is just the market value of the number of shares times the current price that is listed up here. But this next cell right here showing $2,058.10, that is my calculated adjusted capital invested. Now that is my total capital that I have invested minus any premium and distribution that I have earned. And that means out of all of that, I still have $2,058 of my capital still at risk. So therefore, if I take that and divide that by the number of shares that I own, then that comes up to adjusted price per share of $5.02. So that is my real value per share, right? That's my real average, not the $25.12 over here. It's actually the $5.02. So therefore, I have earned back a total of 80% of my capital back. And that definitely looks a whole lot better, and it helps you to better understand where you're actually at in your position. Because before, if you're only looking at the average purchase price that you had over here, I'm looking at $25.12 for my average, and I've spent $10,000, but the market value is only worth $8,400. So I'm showing that I'm down in my position, right? So if I'm only looking at that, then it looks like I am losing money. But you do have to understand you are earning distributions. And if you are selling any calls or puts, then you are also earning some premium. Now, you don't have to do options, but if you are, why not track those as well? But what if I were to sell my shares at the current price of the $20.59 here, all 410 shares? What amount would I actually earn? Or would I be at a loss? That is what these last two sales show you here. The very last one of $6,383.80, that is my total unrealized gains, meaning that if I were to sell all 410 shares right now at $20.59, then I will have earned $6,383.80. Not a loss. That is a gain. That is what I actually will have earned, right? Because I spent $10,297.43 in purchasing the shares, but I have gained distributions and premium here. So that gets deducted from my total capital spent, but then I get to sell the shares, all 410 shares, at the $20.59. So once you add and you subtract all of that up, I come out with $6,383.80 in the good. Now that is selling out, including the distributions, any premium, and all of that, right? So that is closing it out. I will have captured and gained $6,383.80, which means I will have made a 61.99% amount on my money, right? Not too shabby. Not too shabby at all. Now, I do want to also point out any puts that you do have open over here, and I've got 3 puts open. Any puts you do have open, those are potentially shares that you could get assigned, right? So if it does go down below that, you could get assigned those shares. And therefore, you would be purchasing those shares, and therefore you would need to enter that over here to the stock purchase area, which will then increase your capital, and that will affect your adjusted price per share. That will affect your unrealized gains. That will affect the outcome here. Because right now, it is not counting these 300 shares that I've got in the puts because I don't necessarily own them yet. Now, if those expire worthless, then the numbers up here all stay the same, as these will just expire worthless. But if I do get assigned 100 or 200 or all 3 of them for 300 shares, then that will get added over here to my stock purchases, and that will adjust my price per share and my adjusted price per share, right? Keep that in mind anytime that you are selling puts, as that will adjust and change your values in the chart outcome up here at the top. And if that is higher than your adjusted price per share, well, the one I've got highlighted here where my adjusted price per share is $5.02, and I would be purchasing a $20, a $20, and a $22 contract, and therefore that will raise my adjusted price per share. So wanted to point that out. But anyway, that's kind of basically the rundown of it. That's the overall bit of how it works. Now let's just go ahead and start plugging in my new purchases and the distribution that we did earn. So to enter my purchase, I enter in the date here, and I did purchase these shares on 6/5 of 2025. The price that I did purchase those shares were at $20.73. How many shares did I purchase? I only got 5 shares. So that does lower my purchased share average because I purchased an amount of shares under that price. So that does lower that one. But since it is above my adjusted, it ends up raising that adjusted ever so slightly. So now I'm at $5.21 adjusted price per share, but I now have 415 shares. But since we also earned that distribution this week, let's just go ahead and enter that in. Now for the date here, I like to enter in the X date. And that X date is 6/5/2025. And why I do that is because that way it makes it easy for me to look back on the individual stock purchase chart over here. And I can look through those dates right there, especially when I make a new purchase, right? Just like I did here. I purchased 5 shares. So I'm showing 415 shares. But do I get this distribution on all 415 shares? Well, let's just see. So I entered that date of 6/5/2025. That's the X date. And we earned a distribution of $1.4707. Now here comes where you have to decide how many shares actually fall into this eligible number of shares for that distribution. And that's why I like to use the distribution date, because then it helps you to visually see which ones you can count for that distribution and which ones you cannot. So currently, if that distribution date is 6/5, then you have to have owned those shares before the X date. And if 6/5 is the X date, then that means I have to have owned those shares no later than 6/4, right? June the 4th, not June the 5th. June the 5th is the X date. I have to have owned them before the X date. Therefore, it has to be June 4th and before. Well, I look over here to my purchased shares date, and as we can see, I mean, of course, they're all there under and before June the 4th, except the one I just made. The one that I bought was on the X date of 6/5. So those shares, those 5 shares, will not be eligible for this distribution, because this date over here on my purchased shares must be before the X date. And since we're plugging in the X date right here, that's a quick visual to see, okay, this date is on that same date. It is not before that date. So therefore, I cannot count those shares. So I must subtract the 5 shares from the total number of shares that I'm showing up here in my total number of shares. So 415 minus 5, well, that's 410. So I will be able to count 410 shares for this distribution. So I enter in the 410 here. Now once I hit enter, it will calculate and give me the amount of that distribution and how much that will be. We hit enter here and we get $602.99. And as you can see, it also increased my distribution earned up here to $8,118.29. It also adjusted my capital invested, and this is the amount that I actually still have at risk, where it was $2,000, now it's $1,558.77. And it also lowered my adjusted price per share. And this is my adjusted price per share. So it takes into account, as I said before, of that distribution that I've earned, because I did earn it. So I should calculate that into my actual position to know at what point I have earned back all of my capital, and then I'm earning free and clear distributions. So now my adjusted price per share is $3.76. So therefore I have earned back a total of 85% of my money. Now that sounds a whole lot better than looking over here and saying, okay, well, I've got my price per share down to $25.06. All right, well, I'm still down almost $5, $4.50. You know, it's just, okay, well, I hope it gets back up above 25. Now, don't get me wrong, would love to see it back up above 25, because that just means I'm making even more money, right? But this number, that number right there, that's the one that helps you sleep at night, because that shows you that if I count in my distributions and I add back into my premium here that I've earned on options, and I subtract that from the capital that I've spent, I'm not at a $25.06 average. I'm at a $3.76 average. Now that is something to be excited about. Now, of course, the more shares you purchase, then of course the higher that adjusted price per share becomes, because when you're buying the shares at $20, it is above the $3.76 in my case, and therefore that will go up. But if it's only a certain percentage of what amount you are actually earning in distributions here, then you can continually to drop this number, right? But if you're spending out more than you're bringing in on distributions, then of course this will continue to rise up. And in order to get your capital back, honestly, it's all about the time. You got to put the time in to get that distribution back. But if you're rolling it back into the ETF, which is fine if that's what you're wanting to do because you're in the accumulating stage, that is fine. That's your choice. I'm not telling you what to do and what not to do. But eventually you do have to let the distributions come into your pocket and stay in your pocket so that you can earn back your investment. And then at that point, once I get, in my case, that adjusted price per share, once that gets to zero, then that would mean I have earned back all of my invested capital. And at that point, I can take those distributions that I'm earning after that, and I can buy more MSTY with no additional capital added to myself, right, from my bank account. Or I can take those distributions and increase the number of shares in MSTY to help increase the amount of the distributions that I would earn. And that's my choice to do so. Or I can take those distributions and I can purchase another stock to help diversify my portfolio. Or I can take those distributions and I can pay bills with it, right? That's your choice of how you want to do it. But currently, my plan is to get my MSTY paid off, otherwise this down to zero, my adjusted price per share down to zero, and then I can take those distributions, and then if I want, I can roll them right back into MSTY. I can roll a percentage of them back into MSTY. That's also an option, right? Keep a part and roll a part back in. So there's a lot of ways you can handle this, but for me, I'm looking to get my capital back so I no longer have any skin in the game, and then I can take the YieldMax money that they're paying me in distribution and I can up my shares at that point. That way, I no longer have my capital, and that's my personal capital, invested. That's definitely a good way to look at it. But you do have to decide how you want to handle it. If you're wanting to keep accumulating, keep rolling it back in, that's your choice. But for me, I would much rather get my initial out of it first and then start building up the numbers. But as long as you have capital at risk, then you are at risk, right? But once I've got my capital back, I'm no longer at risk. And I can then build it up to help pay me more every 4 weeks of that distribution, assuming we would continue to get that distribution every 4 weeks, right? So it's just the way I look at it, and you have to do your own decision making on that deal. So anyway, I wanted to update this spreadsheet. I was super excited about getting it updated because I always love to get a distribution with MSTY, and I know it is lower, right? We did only receive $1.47, but it's not the lowest, right? Even in the time that I've owned it, my lowest was $1.33 in April, and then it went to $2.37, and now we're at $1.47, right? So it really just all depends on YieldMax Fund Manager of how well they can manage those calls and the synthetics. Because the better they can manage that and keep those under control, the better the distribution per share could possibly be. So if you're interested in getting this spreadsheet, there will be a link pinned to the top of the comments, and there also will be a link in the description where you can buy me a cup of coffee. It's a cheap cup, believe me, and that would give you access to this sheet. And when you get access to this sheet and you first open it, it will open to this download your copy. And it'll show you how to make your copy of this sheet. Because when it first comes in, it will be a view-only sheet. And that view-only sheet you cannot enter information into. So therefore, you must make your own personal copy of it. And when you do, and you'll follow these instructions right here for the computer, and there's the instructions for the phone. And once you make your copy of it, then you'll see at the bottom, there's the notes section, and you can go through those. And then you do have the simple stock tracker sheet here. And yours will have in here, instead of blank, it will say MSTY in the tab section here. Now you can change that if you're tracking a different one, but if you are just tracking MSTY, then you can leave it as is. And you can make a duplicate of that tab so that you can also track other ones as well. But it will look like this. It'll be blank with your tables. You enter in your ticker symbol, and then you start plugging in your entries that you've purchased and the distributions you've earned. And if you have any premium that you've earned, you can enter that into this table over here. This little yes drop down box right here, it basically says, do you want to include your premium into the calculations above? I think when you first download it, it will be set to no. And that means it will not calculate and factor in your premium into the adjusted price. If you would like for it to, then you can switch it to yes. And then it will add your premium into this premium section, which will then be used to calculate your adjusted price per share. So again, if you would like a copy, check out the top of the pinned comments or in the description for that link to buy me a coffee and get your copy of it so that you can enter and track your position to find out what your real adjusted price per share is. But if you have your own way of doing that, of tracking your position, then definitely please use that. This is only for those who do not have a way of tracking their position or would just like to try this sheet out for themselves. So I think I'm going to wrap it up right there. If you don't mind, hit that subscribe button, smash the like button. It'd be much appreciated. And as always, I am not a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. Please do your own due diligence before you get into any stock plays. And until next time, legend out.